Ishwarama's resplendent sun. It's the start of a bright new day. Time to rise, time to shine, Lord divine. Time to lead us along life's way. Awake, Lord of Buddha party. Awake, O Lord, over all mankind. Awake, O Lord of compassion, that the world good fortune may find.
Sai Ram, brothers and sisters. I think we could start with a greater salutation to Bhagwan. So I will repeat, Sai Ram. We are fortunate today, by the grace of Bhagwan, to have Dr. Jack Hawley and Mrs. Louise Hawley to address us. Dr. Jack Hawley is the president of John A. Hawley Associates, which specializes in management consultancy. It's heartening to note that the emphasis of this consultancy company is on organizational truth, on facing up and making lasting changes in organizational beliefs, values, and way of life. These seem to be much related to Bhagwan's mission towards humanity and so very relevant to present-day society. Dr. Hawley has taught in several universities, including Cornell, Pepperdine, US Riverside, and Sri Sathya Sai Institute in India. His recent book, under the directions of Bhagwan Baba, is entitled Reawakening the Spirit in Work, the Power of Dharmic Management. I have no doubt that this is another great contribution towards the spiritual development of mankind. Dr. and Mrs. Hawley live in South California, India and Mexico, and have been part of the Sai family since the 80s. For the past several years, they have been blessed to spend up to 6 months a year at Prashanti Nilayam at the lotus feet of Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. Mrs. Louise Hawley had been a community activist, homemaker, part-time teacher, along with her events producing business. However, in 1987, she detached herself from mundane pursuits to get into the real mission of life as ordained by Bhagwan. When not in India, both of them frequently give talks on Sai Baba's teachings and human values in management to Sai organizations around the world. They also give presentations at management conferences to non-Sai people, which are often entitled Glimpses of God. I'm sure their contributions in this Western Canada Sai conference will be most valuable for all of us, particularly those who may get involved in the organizational aspect of the Sai movement. Now let us give a warm welcome to Dr. Jack Hawley and Mrs. Louise Hawley. Thank you, Sarah.
Pranams at the lotus feet of Sri Satya Sai Baba. Please, Swami, accept these words as offerings to you. Please, Swami, flow through us. Please, Swami, think through us, feel through us. Please, Swami, speak through us, act through us. Most of all, Swami, love through us. And please, Swami, make us aware that you're doing that as you do it. Jai Sairam. We have about 1 hour, so we're going to clip right along if we can. We'll both talk and pass the mic back and forth, or pass our bodies back and forth so the mic gets close to us. Our theme today is a very important theme. It's these precious few days of love and sadhana and duty. Precious few days that we have, all of us, we. Louise and I are in the early middle of a great God adventure, as all of you are in your own stage of your great God adventure. We're all there. Whether we're Sai devotees or not, we're still all in the middle of that great spiritual adventure that people have termed called life. And it's an important adventure, and the theme that we're talking about today, duty, sadhana, love, precious few days, and so forth, is a very important theme because we're all in a battle as well as in the middle of that adventure. All of us fighting a battle, and Swami reminds us of it often, over and over again. And the interesting thing about this battle is that the adversaries are unbeatable. Maya, anger, desire, attachment, greed, egoism, selfishness. We could go on with a few more. But those are, Swami tells us, very, very powerful adversaries. So the only answer that we have then for that is to call on something, call on someone that's as powerful. That's the only answer any of us have. Otherwise, we're going to get beaten. Otherwise, these things like greed and anger and so forth will climb up and grab us and win. So we're in the middle of this great battle. Before we came here, we were in San Diego. We live in Manhattan Beach, which is 100 miles or so north of San Diego. But we were in San Diego, and I had to do a conference, a regular management conference that day. And then the next evening, we had to speak to a Sai center in the Los Angeles area. And Louise, her pattern, by the way, is to learn much differently than I do. And I think it's worth mentioning here because whenever we mention it, it seems to ring true with a lot of people. And what she does, she learns more through her heart than through her intellect. The rest of us, or many of us, learn through our left brain. She learns through her right brain. And she learns things, for example, from animals. She learns a lot more from animals than she does from people. In Prashanti, the animals might be bullocks or monkeys or birds, especially birds. They come and talk to her a lot. In this country, the animals can be anything. Birds also. But in San Diego, while I was away at this conference, she was sitting in the little garden of the motel that we were staying in. And she was in a good mood, and little butterflies kept flittering around her, flittering around. And then bunnies came across the lawn and so forth. And as I recall of it, one of them, or the words came very clearly in her mind, is she was thinking of the next day's talk, is, "You will be talking to the Pandavas." How nice.
Just like Swami speaks, you will be talking to the Pandavas. And that's what you are.
So here we are again talking to the Pandavas. And that sort of is a nice way of thinking about it. If we are all in the battle, at least we're talking to the people who are on the right side. Okay. Our life pattern over the past 8 years really has been interesting. We've been spending 6 or up to 6 months, 4 or 6 months, 4 or 5 or 6 months in India with Swami. Very, very blessed, wonderful time. And when we're not there, all of our kids, by the way, have grown up. Five of them have grown up, and they're all in different places of the world. So when we're not in India, we are wherever Swami puts us. That might be Calgary, or that might be UK, or wherever. Soon it'll be Australia, or rather Argentina, and then Geneva, Switzerland. So we'll be going back to see Swami in October through that route. And that seems to be the way we live our life. We're either on our way, working our way to India, or working our way from India. And India is the center of where we are.
He makes us work,
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's really very nice, by the way, just being in the place that he has us. And we look at each other, we're tired, we don't know where we're going to go next. Well, it's sort of a nice place to be. Let me talk a little bit about sadhana. I mentioned that in the theme, so let's make sure that we know what sadhana is. All of us know that sadhana is the inward path. But when we listen or we read Swami and what Swami says about sadhana, he says much more. For instance, he says that 70% of sadhana is atma vichara, is self-inquiry. 70% of sadhana is self-inquiry. He says that sadhana isn't just prayers and puja. It's gradually replacing habit patterns. It's gradually changing. It's reprogramming ourselves. I haven't heard him use that term, but he will. It's reprogramming ourselves slowly but surely so that we always turn Godward rather than always turn in the direction of worldliness. That's what sadhana is. I think of a quick little story that Mr. Narasimhan, V.K. Narasimhan, the Sanatana Sarati man, was going to give a talk to the Westerners, or he gave a talk, and immediately afterwards he was sitting on the veranda, and Swami said, "Come inside." So they talked, and Narasimhan told me what Swami said. Swami looked at him, he said, "You should tell them that there are no mountaintops to climb. So there are only habits to replace one by one." And that's sadhana. That's really what we're talking about. So mix that with duty, and then mix it with the key ingredient, which is love, and we've got today's life pattern and today's themes. Why don't you talk specifically toward the idea of these precious days, huh?
Okay. I guess it was last October. Swami told us that we could leave, and of course I was sad about leaving, but I know we had a job to do because that's what he said. Anyway, I went into darshan, and I was meditating, and I closed my eyes, and I was very still. And I felt Swami was all coming down the aisle or coming all around me. And I heard a song. I'm not going to sing it. It's, "And these few precious days I'll spend with you. These precious days I'll spend with you." And I realized that was my mother's favorite song. Then I realized that that day was her birthday. And my mother and I had a very special relationship. She was the one that taught me about love. She was the one who was my teacher. She was the one who told me to love as long as I could, and do not ever give any hate out to anybody. So that was a relationship between my mother and I. So she developed Alzheimer's, and slowly, she began to wither away. Her mind withered, her body withered. She didn't know who we were. And she died. She died in 1990. We were in Prashanti at that time, and we were still writing the book, Swami's book. And we didn't get the telegram in time to go back, only we wouldn't have gone back anyway.
It was 6 days later.
Yeah, it was 6 days later, that's right. And then Jack, when we got the telegram, Jack said to me, go back in your journal. I keep a journal, and I write love letters to Swami every day. And he said, go back into your journal the day she died and see if something occurred that was different. So I went back, and sure enough, I had a little circle around this thing. I was in the mandir, and nobody was there, you know, everybody had gone with Swami, so just a very few people were there. And I was coming out of the mandir after singing bhajans, and this little tiny old woman, I've never seen her before, never seen her since, she came up to me, and she took my cheeks in her hands, and she says, I love you, I love you, I love you. And that's exactly what my mother always did. Then the last years of her life, I had to go and take care of her. One night before we decided that she was to go into a rest home. And so she was just like a little kid. She would get up out of bed and go down the stairs, and I said, no, Mother, you have to go back up the stairs. She didn't know who I was. And so I'd take her back up the stairs, and she'd try to lie down. Then she'd come down the stairs again. Then I said, no, Mother, you have to go upstairs. And so this time I said, I'm going to go and tell her bedtime stories like she did when I was young. So, knowing that she didn't understand a single word that I was saying, I told her all about Swami. I told her all about the miracles that I've seen. I've told her how precious a time this was. And then I saw her grow groggy, so I knew she was ready to sleep. So I got up very quietly so I wouldn't wake her. Now, remember, she hasn't spoken my name for at least 5 years. So I go to the switch, and I'm just ready to turn it off, the light off. And I hear her voice. And her voice said to me, Wheezy, that's what she called me, I'll never forget the name Sai Baba.
Look at that simple little story, and you get an awful lot, really. And that's the way we learn from Swami, as you all know as well as we do. And the simple little stories are his great, great, deep, deep teachings. And this story of love. On the one hand, it can be a simple little story. On the other hand, it's a very complicated thing about what the whole universe is about. And what it is it's about love. At the center of everything we do, everything we think and say and so forth is love. Why? Because love is God. Love is God. Nothing less, nothing more. Nothing less, nothing more. Let me now spend a few minutes talking about the book, because not so much that the book is important, but the story itself is sort of an interesting story, and it tells about how Swami works. 5 years ago now. 5 years ago, I was lecturing at the Institute to the MBA boys and the faculty in the MBA school. And I was lecturing on organization transformation. And it was a series of lectures, 3 or 4 over the course of a week. So I was preparing, and I had all of my transparencies ready for the overhead projector and so forth, but I didn't have a title for it. And it was on organization transformation, which in my business really means that you go and look for the soul of an organization. What is it really about? And of course, when you look for the soul of an organization, you have to look into your own soul and say, what am I? Who am I? What am I about? And so forth. So it was a deep series of lectures, and I didn't have a title. I didn't have something that really rung true. So I was meditating before darshan one day, and this voice comes into my mind very clearly: dharmic management. That Indian lilt, slight Indian accent. Dharmic management. Ooh, perfect. Wow, couldn't be better. I mean, it captured everything that the book, or that the lectures rather were about. It captured the values and all that. Dharmic management. Wow. So it took me about a minute to zip off a title page on the transparencies, and I walked out to darshan. And darshan was immediate. And of course, as luck would have it, luck, quotes luck, as luck would have it, of the thousands of people there that day, I got first line. Whenever Swami has something to do with you or for you especially, you get first line, it seems. So I got first line. I was sitting in front row, very happy, ready to go over and start the lectures after darshan was over. And Swami comes walking by, and he looks down at me with a little playful look in his eye. So I hold up this sheaf of papers and transparencies on the front page is dharmic management. And he smiles, big smile, says, oh, yes, dharmic management. Same exact words. Swish, swish, swish in midair. And the vibhuti comes off his hand, he puts it on my forehead, and then he pats me on the shoulder. And so he's very happy, I'm very happy. And as he walked away, I realized that for 3 or 4 weeks, I hadn't been able to sleep on my left shoulder because I had bursitis in it. So here he is getting double mileage out of his swish, swish. So he's patting me on the shoulder, he's confirming that dharmic management is indeed the title that's appropriate for this, and that he gave it to me. He's very happy with me, and not only that, but he takes away some pain that had been bothering me. Not an awful lot, but it had been bothering me. So that's the way it started. Well, within the next 3 or 4 days, a man walked by me, a man who, after the lectures, a man walked by. He's an American doctor, a very shy fellow, soft-spoken, which is rare for a doctor, any of you who are doctors. But anyway, he's sort of a quiet fellow, and you wouldn't expect this out of him. So he came up to me and he says, don't fool around making a workshop out of that, write a book. And it was so clear, so clear to me. I said, uh-oh, I'm in trouble, because I'm basically lazy, and no way did I want to write a book. So I hemmed and hawed for a few weeks, and I talked with various people. One of the persons I talked with was Al Drucker. He was there at the time, and he said, oh, great idea. He said, nobody's writing on that subject, dharmic management. He said, take your time and do it right, was his suggestion. He says, oh, take 5 or 6 years or 7 years. And he started mentioning these long years. I started glowing. Oh, good, 5 or 6 or 7 years. With any luck, I'll be dead and I won't have to finish the book. But I'm not lucky. The next day, after I had that conversation, the next morning, Swami calls me in for an interview. And he looks me in the eye and he says, write quickly. So the next morning, and he said, the country needs it. Now, I don't know what country he was referring to, but I knew that he meant write quickly. So, and that was, by the way, also in October, as the world would have it, several years ago. So I had been puttering around, by the way, trying to write longhand and so forth. So I jumped on an airplane and flew back to California, left her there, to get a laptop computer. And I'm the kind of person, if I'm going to make a major outlay of money like that, I research it and make sure I have the right specs and the right technology and the right batteries and all that stuff. So I went back and I told her, well, I probably won't be back for a month or 6 weeks after, getting that thing. And so I land in California and I call up my friend, my best friend. He said, Jackie, for the last 6 weeks, he said, I've been researching laptop computers. So I said, oh, and he told me the 3 best ones, and I went up and I sheafed through his stuff. But the next day, as the world would turn, I had my laptop computer. And within a week, I was back at Prashanti. Big surprise for her, big surprise for everybody. It wasn't a surprise for somebody we know, but it was a surprise for all the rest of us. And the kind of closeness he was throughout this project, I think, is important for all of you to know. And I hearken back to Jagdishan's, the Malaysian Sai organization fellow, his prayer, and I love his prayer. It's a wonderful prayer because it keeps action where it's supposed to be. And he says to Swami inside, he says, Swami, if what I'm doing is right, clear the way for me. If what I'm doing is wrong, stop me quick. Well, in this case, I guess Swami wanted to clear the way because he knew that I was going to have a hard enough time to write anyway. So he did. He provided everything. For example,
just happened to have a great big furniture box. And Jack said, oh, good, that'll be my desk. And he proceeded to make pretend drawers out of this. And he drew all over it. And, it was wonderful.
People would come in our room. See, we didn't have any furniture, of course. People would come in our room and they could do a double take on the box because it really looked like a desk after I drew and, with a big pen on it. But anyway, way beyond that, Swami provided everything in a material sense. He provided everything in an intellectual sense, and he provided everything in a spiritual sense as I went through and worked on this book, and she with me. Books would fall off the shelf, or people would come up and make an outright gift of books to me when I'd get stumped intellectually. By the way, the libraries have nothing on this, really. There's just nothing written on spirituality and management. I had, when I'd have big doubts, 2 different times, Swami called me, and one time he looked at me, he says, your inner voice is me. On this project, anyway. Your inner voice is me, the way he said it. So powerful. Giving me confidence that, yes, you're talking about philosophy, and that's not your field, and yes, you're talking about deep spirituality, and that also isn't your field, but your inner voice is me, and don't forget it. I think that goes for all of us. Once we really tap into that inner truth, then we're tapping into that force. We're tapping into that Swami force, that God force that's in us. One time, another interesting little story is the story of the title, or rather the cover of the book. And the cover of the book has a painting by Nicholas Roerich on it in the background. And Nicholas Roerich was a great Russian painter from the 1920s. He's a master painter. He's an interesting man, too. He was up for the Nobel Peace Prize in those days. So he's an interesting man in addition to being just a good painter. And his paintings are all spiritual, and they're of the Himalayas. He lived for many, many years in India. For the last 40 years of his life, he lived in the Kulu Valley. And his son was still alive, and his son had married an Indian dancer, movie star lady, and they were both living in Bangalore. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice to go in and visit with his son and get a copy of the Nicholas Roerich's painting for the cover? So Louise and I went in there one time just before we were coming back to the States. And
problems with your computer.
Oh yeah, thank you. And at the same time I was having problems with my computer. It wouldn't copy. And I didn't know how to get it to copy certain things. And we had to go through all those security devices across the world coming back. So I was afraid that I was going to lose part of the that he had worked so hard on. So I had those 2 problems. So Well, and by the way, to make the problems even worse, we spent 3 days in Bangalore looking for Nicholas Rorick's son, who was Svetoslav Rorick. And we couldn't find them. We finally tracked down their house. We went out and stood outside the gate, nobody there, and the weeds were starting to grow on the lawn. And we figured that he'd be an old man by now, so maybe he was gone. So we gave up after the 3 days, and we went back to Prashanti. So in my meditation to Swami, I said, well, Swami, you're going to have to take this. I said, 2 problems. One is the computer won't copy, and I'm not going to worry about it if you take that problem. And secondly is, I guess I have to give up, have to release my desires to have a Nicholas Rorick painting for the cover. So that was in the 10-minute meditation period right after evening bhajans, those of you who know when we can go into the hall. So I came back out and I met her at the ice cream place, and I sat down under the tree. In those days you could sit down for a while before they kicked you out. But I sat down under the tree. She was sitting here and I was sitting here. Well, a woman sat on the other side of her and a woman sat on the side of me. And this woman started talking to me, and she said, I'm a computer consultant from New York, and you'd be surprised at how easy it's going to be to fix your computer. I'll be over tomorrow, and while she's saying this, Louise is elbowing me, Jack, just a minute. So she said, so this woman says, so I'll be over at 1 o'clock tomorrow to your place, and we'll fix your computer, don't worry about it. Oh, very happy, I'm very happy. So I said, yes, to her. So this woman that just sat down on the other side of me is a good friend of the Rorick family in Bangalore, and she wants us to come in and have tea on Sunday, which we did, by the way, in which he gave me immediate permission to use one of the paintings. So that's the kind of clearing out that Swami would do. Everything he was doing for us. Yes?
What a lot of people ask me, well, what did you do if he was working so hard? Actually, he was really working hard from 2:30 in the morning until 8 at night. And my job was just to hold the space and fill it with love and make sure that he was undisturbed and that he and Swami could be one and do his work.
Funny. One time she was out and I was writing there's a section in the book on love, and I was trying to make this esoteric subject meaningful to business people. So I was wrestling with that problem, that knotty problem of how do you make this interesting to hard-nosed businessmen, for example. So she's out in the darshan line one day praying, Swami, please help Jack write this section on love. Inside of her, Swami walks by, he stops and he looks at her, he said, I am. Startled.
Another time, he thinks he's through with the book, right? This is the writer, he thinks he's through with the book, and we're ready to go home and print it. And I'm in back of the mandir, ready to go to bhajans, and Jack's outside wanting Swami, some direction from Swami. And this lady, I don't know who she is, again.
This was a tall one rather than
a tall one. She walks right by me and she says, he hasn't finished the last chapter.
See? Lazy Jack trying to get by with something. And what really happened was this. I was confronted with writing a chapter or a set of chapters on leadership. And I had purposely left it out because I knew leadership was going to require a lot more work, Lazy Jack. And it would be another 3 months, probably another 30 books to read and so forth. So it would be really a big expenditure of effort and time. Swami one time said, don't you worry about that, I'll take care of it in terms of time and so forth. So I didn't really worry about it, but a lot of devotees were asking me for things. So I felt some obligation to get the thing in the works quickly. So I had rationalized my way one day. As a matter of fact, I had a terrible headache, and I don't know what it was. So you know how you do. Inside of me, I thought, well, the big one is hit. You know, I won't be on this earth very long, you know, with this kind of headache. So I figured I don't have time enough anyway to write, you know, to invest this 3 months. So I was kidding it to it. So I said, I'm not going to do it. That'll be in the next book. So as soon as we got back to the States, I looked at her and I hemmed and hawed for maybe 3 or 4 days. And finally I said, I'm going to go into my office right now and make the decision about whether to include leadership in this book or put it in the next book. So I went in and I sat down in my chair, and as soon as I sat in my chair, as soon as I sat, in the instant I hit the chair, the phone rang, and it was a person from the Psi organization quite far away. I'd never met him. He said, Jack, he said, I hear you're writing a book on dharmic management. He said, do you have anything on leadership? He said, I really need something on leadership. What can I do? I said, well, I laughed. I said, no, I don't have it right now. I said, I will in 3 months. So that's the kind of things that Swami did as we worked on this. Oh, funny about her role, by the way. One time, on our way back to India, we stopped in Switzerland. And the group that we talked with, and we, tongue-in-cheek, by the way, we'd always say glimpses of God, half tongue-in-cheek. So for those who wanted to believe, could believe, but for those people who are very frightened about the idea of catching really a glimpse of God, we would let them think it's sort of a joke. So it's one of those half jokes and half not jokes. But they were so interested in this experience, life experience of ours, and the idea of living life this way and so forth, that they wanted to come to India. So they got together a group to come to India.
I really didn't think that they were going to come. I mean, I just didn't think. People say, oh, I'd like to go. But I never think that they were going to show up.
So anyway, they showed up. So there I was writing on my computer, and she's like the guardian. She's like the lion at the gate. And she wouldn't let me get distracted. See, that was her role. So she's at the gate, and this knock on the door, and the woman that's leading this group of 8 people from Switzerland. So I'm listening. Of course, our room is small. By that time, we've got a different. So our room is small. So I'm listening. So she steps outside the door. She said, "Oh, I'm glad to meet you." And
shut the door.
She shut the door behind her, so I couldn't hear, so I wouldn't be disturbed. So as I wrote, I had a fantasy. And my fantasy was this, that my mother, my sainted mother in heaven, gets a 5-minute pass. And she said, well, of all the places on earth that I'd prefer to go, I think I'll go down and I'll visit Jack at the ashram. So she stops in, she comes up and knocks on the door, and Louise answers her, oh, hello, Margaret, how are you? And she steps out the door and shuts the door behind her so she wouldn't disturb my writing. Well, maybe not that far, but almost. Lots more we could talk about that.
Everyone in the ashram was asking me, who's the publisher? And I would say, I don't know, but all I know is that he wears an orange gown. You know?
Yeah, when we came back, when we finally had the final version, Swami blessed it, and then we came back and we shopped it around the publishers for 6 or 8 months. Nobody took. None of the publishers were interested. It wasn't a big list because, I'll tell you the truth, we weren't really worried, but because we knew that somehow it would get published. So I went back to Swami and I said, Swami, publishers don't seem to understand this book. And he turned around very quickly, very sternly. He says, don't you worry about that. I will take care of that. Okay. So I didn't worry at all about it after that. And then within maybe a month, it was almost as if the world, all the electrons in the world changed directions. He did something with his hand or whatever. I was in the States at that time. And 3 very good publishers came after it. And they talked to me about how this is really the kind of topic they want to publish and so forth. So then my problem was, which one should I pick? So I say a little prayer. I said, Swami, please guide me on this. Which publisher is the right one? And the CEO of the 3rd publisher calls me on the phone the next day. He said, hello. He said, my name is Steve Prashanti. Yeah, it's spelled a little bit differently, but it sounds exactly the same. Steve Prashanti from San Francisco, Barrett Kohler Publishers. And I thought that I had the answer. So we went up and we talked to them, and she would come with me too. It was very nice, very good team. So everything went so well. I mean, the first meeting that we had there, for example, Steve.
First of all, he said, before I do anything on this manuscript, before I even open it up, I want to say a prayer. So he said a prayer.
With Steve Prashanti.
This is the publisher. I've never heard of this before. And so he said a prayer, and we said Gayatri's.
It's very nice. He had never heard Gayatri, and we never heard his prayer. He's, I think, a Mormon. But, okay, so anyway, it all went so well, except for one thing. And the one thing was, in the States and in the Western world, you'll all understand that, the title, Dharmic Management, didn't really play very well. They didn't know what it meant. So he said, well, we don't know what that means. So I described what it meant. So he said, well, we're afraid we're going to have to change that. This is a dialogue that went on over a couple of months. And I said, well, you can't change it. And I'd explain how the title came to me, Dharmic Management, in my meditation years ago and so forth. So he said, well, even so, he said, this is the marketing data that we have. And he started pouring numbers at me, computer readouts and all that stuff. And really, indeed, it was really clear that people didn't know what it meant. Or they would think of it as a cult or something that just wouldn't sell. And Swami had told me to get it published by a commercial publisher, because the market that we're going after are people who are on the verge of spirituality, people who are in management, who are in powerful positions, for example, but weren't necessarily, or didn't see themselves as seekers, but really needed some of these kind of spiritual answers and so forth. So we were going after a rather naive, is the term that they used, a naive market. So he kept deluging us with information. And finally it came to August 31st. We were on our way to Prashanti the next day, 1st of September, and we still hadn't signed the publishing agreement. And this is after like a whole year of limping along, not finding a publisher, getting one finally. And we hadn't signed the agreement because we hadn't agreed on the title. So we had one final meeting there in San Francisco. And by the way, don't forget too that they're such nice people. We got along very well with them. Every time we went there, they bent over backwards. They loved the idea of the cover, you know, and most of the times as an author, you have nothing to say about the cover. They loved the idea of the cover and so forth. So everything was going perfectly except for the title. And in this meeting, they used some information from their sales reps, salespeople. They said, the bookstore owners just don't know what this means, so they won't buy it. So she looked at me and I looked at her, and we thought, well, Swami is probably fine with this. So we said, okay. And the title that they picked was right out of the book anyway. I mean, the words in the book were Reawakening the Spirit and Work, the Power of Dharmic Management. So they picked that title. So we said, well, all right, I guess that'll do. And Dharmic Management is in there anyway in a subtitle. So we go back to India the next day, get on the plane, go back. And I'm on the veranda, still goofy, dizzy from the flight. And Swami comes out and he looks at me and says, inside. So I go inside, and as I walk by him, he grabbed my pocket and yanked it out. He says, where's wife? I said, she's out there. So he said, bring her. Okay. So we go inside, and we sit down. And there's a room, interview room full of people, maybe 12 or 15 people. And Louise is sitting way in the back. And from his tone of voice, I knew that I was in trouble. So I was over against the wall, you know, by the stairs, trying to press myself through the wall, trying not to be in that room. And he looked at Louise. He said, sir, what's the title of the book?
And then I looked at Jack, and he wasn't reacting. And then I looked at Swami, and Swami was looking at me. And then all of a sudden I got, I don't know the title inside of me. Can you imagine? Here you are with God, and you don't have anything. Finally, I get it out. Reawakening the Spirit in Work. Got that one. The Power of Dharmic Management. Got that one. Working and Living with Integrity.
Which was one of the alternative titles that we were talking about. And I'm waiting, no, I'm trying to catch her attention. No, behind Swami, as if he's not watching. No. So Swami looks over at me and he said, how many titles? I said, only 2, Swami. No, she said 3 first.
He said, how many titles? And I said, 3.
And then he looked at me and I said, no, only 2, Swami, only 2. And he said, confusion. And he goes up and sits back down in his chair. So I'm dying. I mean, blood is coming out of every pore in my body. I'm suffering so bad. Here, he had given me the title. I defended it. I'd worked on it. He'd helped me. Every word in the book was his. And at the last minute, I was just about ready to make the touchdown or just to go over the goal line, and I fumbled the ball. That's the way I saw it. Oh, terrible thing. She was laughing. We were back in our room afterwards. She was laughing at me. I said, are you kidding? I said, I'm going to go to my grave with this mistake. I said, I'll never be able to rectify this. Awful. What can I do? So I was heartbroken. So over the next 3 days, though, some energy kicked in, and I wrote a 4-page, single-spaced memo, which was really like a legal brief, to the publisher. And what it did is lay out in like 8 or 9 clear statements the logic for changing the title back to Dharmic Management only. And if they wanted a subtitle, I was willing to give them a subtitle, but Dharmic Management had to be the title. So I had this all ready, and it was, by the way, very well done. 4 pages, single-spaced, my lawyer brain working. So, and by that time also, Padmanabhan in the village had a fax. So I was going to go out and fax it to the publisher. And the last paragraph, by the way, in the memorandum was this. It said, anyway, it's my book. And if you don't want to publish it, I'll get another publisher. And if it costs, and they're already printing it. So if I said, so cost anything, if it's going to cost me anything to get out of this contract, that's the way it goes, I'll be glad to pay that. So I was all ready to walk. See, that's the key. I was ready to walk, go away. So as I walked by, and I was going to walk out to the village, and as I walked by, I said, I better, and this was between darshans, so people were sitting on the veranda and so forth, and Swami every once in a while comes out. So I thought, well, maybe he'll come out today. So I thought, I better check it with him. A little voice came, I better check this with him. So I sat on the veranda waiting, and finally he came out, and he looked around, and he called me in for a private session. Oh, and he said, and where's wife? Luckily, she was out there waiting. So he calls us both in, and he starts talking to us like an old friend. Very, he couldn't be sweeter. It was wonderful. He said, well, he said, let's talk about the title. And I'm puzzled. He said, we can call the book, we could call the book The Spirit in Work. No, The Spirit of Work. Oh, The Spirit in Work, very simple. Then he looked at the puzzlement on my face. He said, what's the matter? He said, is book being printed now? I said, yes, Swami. He said, oh, fine, no problem. I will bless. Well, I was relieved, of course, but still puzzled. And over the next few weeks and months, it came clearer and clearer to me that what had happened is that Swami had given me an experience in letting go. So here's this thing that I was working on with him, his work that I got attached to, his work that I started seeing as, quotes, mine. And what, is there any me to have mine? No. And so what he did is give me an experience of letting go of that. Once I had crossed over that psychological bridge and was ready to walk, ready to say, hey, I don't care if it costs me money, I don't care what, we have, has to be done right, then he was fine with it. So it was one of those little, subtle, terribly important teachings that he gives. Often he comes out and he says to the boys, what is, for example, you've all heard him. How old are you? The boy will say, I'm 9, Swami. How do you know? Ooh, gulp. How do you know that you're 9? And the boy will hesitate and fumble and so forth, and sooner or later he'll come out and say, well, my parents told me. So, well, that's a good answer. But that's, again, another example of the same teaching. Experience. Swami says all the book learning in the world is nothing, unless you can experience it. Put it to practice. Put it into practice is where it's all about. So that's what he's always teaching. That reminded me, at the same time, a quote from Muhammad came to me. And the quote went something like this. If a philosopher does not experience and realize his own philosophy, then all he is an ass with a load of books, carrying a load of books. When you think of it, that's very, that's a wonderful barnyard kind of an example, isn't it? So that's Swami's lessons on experiencing. Finally, after we went back, the final result of it was this, that, excuse me, Swami looked at the last trip when we left, after that big blow-up, he said, when the book finally gets printed, you bring it back to Kodai Canal and I will see. I said, oh, thank you, Swami. So we were happy, because the year before we had asked him if we could go to Kodai. He said, no, too short. We were leaving around January or February. He said, too short between when we come back. So this time he said, you bring the book and I will bless. So I was very happy. So we got the book published, and we got it right under the deadline, really, up to the final. As a matter of fact, we were on our way to the airplane when we picked up the books. We picked up 10 copies. They were the first off the press. Nobody else had them. And we went to India and took the taxi ride to Kodai Canal, and it was like going to heaven. You know, you're going across those hot plains in this terrible, that time of year is awful. And then slowly we started climbing, and the air got cleaner, and the land got greener, and it got cooler, and it became more and more human. And then when we got to Kodai Canal, there it was a beautiful place, and it was very cool in the mornings, and all the mist would seem to float off the lake towards Swami's driveway. It was really wonderful. And we went inside. He asked us to go inside, and he immediately walked over and picked up the book and blessed it so very nicely. He flipped through it, and he read it for maybe 4 or 5 minutes and blessed it, and I was very happy. And then he gave it back to me, but he waited. And I wondered, what's he waiting for? Oh. So I reached into my pocket quickly and grabbed a pen, asked him to sign my copy of the book. So he smiled, and he signed my copy of the book. And it wasn't until afterwards that I realized that the pen that I'd grabbed him was one of the pens that I'd snitched out of the hotel on our way over in Hong Kong. Okay.
How much time do we have?
5 minutes.
We're going to tell a couple of stories and then end. I guess that'll be, that's all we have. About the 4th or 5th time, you all obviously know I love to love, so I won't get into that. But about the 4th time, I saw Swami, and he was coming out and darshan in the afternoon, and I thought, oh, Swami, show me God. And he was beginning to walk kind of toward me, and his orange gown was swinging, and his hair was kind of blowing in the wind. And he came right to me and turned to me, and he had no face. All I saw was stars as far as I could see. Do you want to?
I think I want to tell one more story. And this is what we got about 112 stories here that we're pointing to. But one time during the writing of the book, the way I timed it in Prashanti, because you have to carve out time there. You know, you think you're going to an ashram so you'll have all the time in the world, and you don't. Every minute is taken up. So to carve out the time, I would go to morning darshan, and then I wouldn't go to bhajans. So I missed bhajans, and I felt very righteous about that. Oh boy, poor me, I'm missing bhajans. Wow, I can't go to bhajans. And then I'd go to afternoon darshan and miss bhajans. So I felt very righteous. And then, as a matter of fact, I was working on those chapters on love. I finished them. Finally, it took like a couple of months to write them. And I felt so good about that. I was, quotes, I was going to give myself a present. And the present was to go to bhajans. So it was in the morning. So I went off to the mandir. And those days, Swami, when he was out on the veranda, they wouldn't let you inside the gates. So Swami was out on the veranda, they said, the Sevadal said, so you can't go in. So I couldn't see him. I said, where is he? He said, he's out, he's behind the pole up there. You can't go in. So I waited and waited and waited 15, 20 minutes, and I'm getting steamed because I can't go inside, I can't see Swami, and I'm giving myself this big present before finishing and so forth. And he didn't come. And finally, bhajan started, so Swami immediately walked right into the hall, and so I couldn't see him anyway. So rather than walking in and singing bhajans, I was too bummed out, so I walked back to my building. And I went to the building, and I went to go in, and it was locked. Of course, they locked the buildings during bhajans, if you remember. So there I was, turned out of my own home and turned out of my mother and father's place down the street. So I didn't know what to do. So I went glumly down to the canteen, and the canteen was open during bhajan, so I sat in the canteen having a cup of tea. And I was looking out that little lane, you know, right next to the Purnachandra Auditorium, that small lane, and maybe 25, 50 meters down the lane was this dog. And the dog had something wrong with its rear hips. It couldn't move, the front paws were okay, but the rear hips were bad, and it was on the ground. The dysplasia, I think is the term for it. So the dog, he'd try to get up and he'd fall down, try to get up and fall down. So this one woman came by, a Western woman. Oh, by the way, and at this time also, and you know how it goes, this is one of those times where you're bummed out about India. You know, like you're there, and we spend 6 months a year though, so we really do like it. We've grown really attached. Well, take that back. We've grown to really enjoy our time in India. But this was one of the down periods, up and down, up and down. This was one of the down periods. And I was sort of bummed out about the crowds and being pushed around, Savadal not letting me in and so forth, and all these pushy people and all that. You know how it goes. So I saw this one woman came by, a Western woman, and she tried, she patted the dog very sweetly, very nicely. And this wasn't registering really. I was just drinking my tea in my own sadness. And then a Western man came by from the other direction, and he had some food. So he picked the dog's head up, and he stuffed the food into the dog's mouth. And then the dog would lie back down. So again, it wasn't registering, I was just seeing this. And then this Indian man came by. The Indian man, again, don't forget, I'm in one of my down Indian moods. The Indian man came by, and he started kicking the dog. Kick, kick, get going, move, get going. And I looked at that, finished my tea, and again, I wouldn't let myself. For some reason, I said, don't judge. I went back, and by that time, my room was open. I walked into my room, and I sat down. It was a darkened room. I had the shutters drawn. And I sat down against the wall in the dark, and I meditated on that. And very strongly, clearly came to me as, don't judge. Don't judge. You don't know. And through some miracle, I didn't. And it was like giving myself one of the greatest, if not the greatest gift I've ever given myself. I didn't judge in that situation where all the information, all the mood, all the setting could have been a negative one. I didn't judge. I just let it go. I just let it be what it was without judging. Why? Because I knew that I just didn't know. I didn't know. So it was a great learning, and I felt the rest of that day, I felt tremendous. I felt so happy. That gift had made me so happy. The next morning, I was in the darshan line, and I was talking to a friend of mine that I talk about these kind of learnings with, and I was telling him about this learning about not judging and how happy I felt after I did that. And at that moment, this Indian man that had done the kicking comes walking by, and as he walked by, I said, "Oh, that's the guy." So, he's the guy. So after he went by, out of earshot range, the friend of mine looked at me and said, "Oh, don't you know?" He said, "That fellow is mentally retarded." See, we don't know. We leap to our conclusions based on all of our science and our observations. We never, ever really know. Okay.
This is in the Gita, in the Yoga of Renunciation, where Krishna was telling Arjuna how man can become perfect and what those ways were and what to do. And Arjuna, kind of exasperated, said, "Well, how really can man become perfect?" And Krishna said lovingly, "Give me your whole heart. Love and adore me. Worship me always. Bow to me only, and you shall have me. This is my promise who love you so dearly. Lay down all duties in me, your refuge. Fear no longer, for I will save you from sin and from bondage."
And I think of the prayer to add to that teaching, the great teaching, the prayer from Chaitanya. Worship the Lord with these words. He says, "You are the Lord of life." He says, "You are the Lord of love." Swami. He says, I do not need wealth or vehicles. Even less do I seek devotion, wisdom, or renunciation. I do not aspire for worldly pleasures or passions. It is enough if I am endowed with the love to love you. If I have that love, all other things will come of their own accord. The only thing I seek is love toward you, Swami. Grant me that boon. Jai Sai Ram.